Climate change is a major hot and cold topic, particularly for far-left woke politicians, the World Economic Forum, and several idiot destructive activists and demonstrators randomly scattered all around the globe. They continually cry that catastrophic Armageddon disaster is imminent, so we must declare climate emergencies, make everyone stop eating meat, destroy farmers' livelihoods, ban fossil fuel vehicles, take money from richer developed countries, and give it to poorer undeveloped countries. The scaremongering never ends. Politicians deliberately ignore polluting greenhouse gas emission facts in order to promote their woke ideological agenda. Facts like New Zealand's emissions are so small on a global scale that there is literally nothing New Zealand can do that would have any impact on the global climate, but nonetheless, Kiwi politicians keep pushing their agenda and deliberately ignore this fact. And that's even assuming carbon emissions are actually the cause of climate change in the first place. There are many skeptics, and quite rightly so. Consider this scenario. Let's assume that none of the following natural occurrences have any significant impact on the global climate. Sunstorms, sun flares, gravitational effects from the planets or moon, tectonic plate shift movements, and finally, the impact of the Earth's ever-changing inner core, of which very little is scientifically known. Then there still remains one other major natural phenomenon, which may actually be the principal source of global climate change, and not greenhouse gas emissions, as we are continually brainwashed to believe. And this phenomenon almost certainly is the reason why New Zealand has been clobbered several times over the past 100 to 200 years, long before greenhouse gas emissions were invented, by cyclones which were more severe and devastating than the recent cyclone Gabrielle. If you haven't already guessed the reason why, it is of course ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation climate pattern, which has had for centuries a massive impact on global climate change. Consider the following facts and video clips, then you decide. It's important to note that El Niño events are part of natural climate cycles and are not directly caused by human activities. El Niño events are closely monitored by meteorologists and climate scientists because of their significant influence on weather and climate patterns worldwide. El Niño is primarily caused by interactions between the ocean and the atmosphere in the tropical Pacific. The underlying mechanism involves a complex set of interactions known as the El Niño Southern Oscillation, ENSO. El Niño is a climate phenomenon that occurs irregularly in the tropical Pacific Ocean. It is characterized by unusually warm ocean temperatures in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific, which can have significant impacts on weather patterns around the globe. The warming of the ocean surface in the central and eastern Pacific during El Niño has far-reaching effects on weather patterns. It disrupts the normal atmospheric circulation, altering the jet stream and shifting rainfall patterns worldwide. The impacts can vary depending on the strength and duration of the El Niño event, but generally, it leads to increased rainfall and flooding in parts of the Americas such as Peru and California, drought conditions in Southeast Asia and Australia, and varying changes in temperature and precipitation patterns in many other regions. La Niña is the counterpart to El Niño and is another phase of ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation climate pattern. While El Niño is characterized by warmer than normal ocean temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific, La Niña represents cooler than normal ocean temperatures in the same region. While El Niño and La Niña are opposite phases of the ENSO cycle, they are not mirror images of each other. They have distinct atmospheric and oceanic characteristics, and can have different regional and global impacts. Similar to El Niño, La Niña has significant impacts on global weather patterns. El Niño and La Niña are natural climate phenomena that have occurred for centuries. They influence several aspects of global climate patterns and have implications for regional and global climate variability. The following are some of the many ways El Niño and La Niña can influence global climate change. Temperature patterns, precipitation patterns, tropical cyclones, atmospheric circulation, Atlantic hurricane activity, Australian monsoons, Indian monsoons.
El Niño and La Niña are the opposite phases of the El Niño Southern Oscillation Cycle, or in short, ENSO, and it accounts for up to 25% of the climate variability for us here in New Zealand.
As the warm water moves across the Pacific, it releases large amounts of warmth and moisture into the atmosphere above it. This influences global weather and climate patterns. So during a normal season, thanks to the Earth's rotation, the winds generally blow from east to west, pushing the ocean with it. So much so that the sea level in Indonesia can be up to a half-meter higher than in South America. So as the warm water near the surface is pushed west, cold water in the east will rise up to replace it. This is known as upwelling. Some years, these trade winds blow harder and more warm water is pushed west. This is what creates La Niña. Every few years, the trade winds weaken or even blow from west to east, a natural phenomenon. When this happens, there is less cold upwelling, and the big mass of warm water ends up sitting closer to South America. This, my friends, creates El Niño. In North Canterbury, it contributed to severe drought, and on a global scale, it led to devastating flooding in Peru. The last time La Niña affected us, we had our warmest summer on record and an impactful marine heat wave.
Every few years, the El Niño phenomenon kicks into life in the Pacific Ocean around the equator. It can affect weather around the world, changing the odds of floods, drought, heat waves, and cold seasons for different regions, even raising global temperatures. But what is El Niño? This changes rainfall patterns over the equatorial Pacific, as well as the large-scale wind patterns. It's this change in winds which has a knock-on effect, changing temperature and rainfall in locations around the world. The main impacts are around the tropics, where you see an increase in the risk of floods in Peru and droughts in Indonesia, India, and parts of Brazil. But virtually wherever you are in the world, El Niño has the potential to affect you directly via the weather or indirectly via socio-economic impacts. There's another impact from El Niño which happens because of all the extra heat at the surface of the tropical Pacific. This releases vast amounts of energy into the atmosphere, which can temporarily push up global temperatures. This is why El Niño years often feature among the warmest on record. Each El Niño event is different, so the global impacts can change.
El Niño and La Niña together are part of a cycle that influences extreme weather and can impact food production, water supply, and even human health in many parts of the globe.
Although there are, say, about 24 models from around the world that contribute to the IPCC projections, only a small handful of those actually have been deemed to reproduce ENSO realistically, which means that they have a realistic amplitude of ENSO, that ENSO events tend to grow at the correct time of year because El Niño and La Niña events do have a seasonality to them. The strongest sea surface temperature anomalies are near the end of the year. Not all events are the same. You have larger events, you have smaller events, you have events that may be focused in farther to the east of the Pacific or more in the central part of the Pacific, and those differences translate into differences in the impacts that are felt in different parts of the world. Because there is so much variability from event to event, and this is something that happens every 4 to 7 years, it's very difficult to actually say with certainty that the changes that you're seeing in ENSO variability are due to changing greenhouse gases as opposed to just part of the variability.
The majority of scientists openly admit that they are unable to accurately predict or computer simulate how the devastating effects of El Niño and La Niña will impact climate change. Yet somehow New Zealand politicians seem to accurately predict that climate change is all about farmers' livestock emissions or humans driving fossil fuel vehicles. How can anyone have confidence in the New Zealand Green Party or New Zealand Labour Party politicians, or any of the climate change scientists or activists, when they ignore the impact of ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation climate pattern on climate change?